February 21, 2011, Kovilkino, Mordovia, Russia. Yesterday, the town was shaken by a brutal crime. Unknown individuals beat 48-year-old local taxi driver Alexander Anufriev with a hammer and stabbed him with a knife. And now, at the local police department, they are interrogating his daughter, 21-year-old Valentina Snegiryova. The young woman is pale as a sheet, but surprisingly unemotional. There are no tears, no hysteria, no grief on her face. Maybe it's just shock, but still, the investigators are in no hurry to let Snegiryova go home. Something about her makes them uneasy. Maybe it's her hands. Her hands are constantly fidgeting with her clothes, reaching for her sweater collar to adjust it, nervously intertwining on her knees. Maybe it's her eyes. They dart around, and Valentina stubbornly avoids direct eye contact. Maybe it's her legs, tapping under the table, a nervous, rapid rhythm without awareness. You're on the Strashnota channel, and today I'll share a tragic case. My scripts are not written by neural networks, although for people who can't tell the difference between AI-generated texts and human ones, it's strange to even talk about it. Nevertheless, I can tell the difference myself, and I can distinguish AI texts. That's just an incomprehensible mess, while the cases I cover are real, and I try to leave sources and additional materials for each of them in the Strashnota Telegram channel via the link. Do you know who did this? They ask Valentina a direct question, but the woman doesn't answer. The rhythm gets louder, and her hands move even faster. You know the saying, witnesses don't live long. The investigator doesn't back down. Aren't you afraid that those you're covering for now might get rid of you? A spasm of fear flashes across Snegiryov's pale face, and then an anxious determination appears. The investigator opens his mouth to ask another question, but she immediately interrupts him. I'll tell you who did it, because I was the one who hired those people to get rid of my father. There are hundreds of thousands of troubled families in Russia. Fathers who drink, use illegal substances, mothers, physical abuse, emotional violence. This is the reality that a huge number of children have to live in. They announced to Valentina. Since early childhood, there was no one to protect Valya. The head of the family, Alexander Anufriev, had a hot temper since his youth, and this temper would break out especially fiercely when the man was drunk, which happened often. He became addicted to alcohol in his youth during the 90s, and over time the addiction only grew stronger. The mother, in whose apartment the young Anufriev family was living at the time, tried many times to persuade Alexander to stop drinking, but it was useless. Angela also tried once, but the man instantly became furious. I'm not a drunk, I work, I bring money home, he growled. Angela retreated. And Alexander really did work and bring money home while he was sober, but as soon as he went on a drinking binge, he immediately turned into a violent idiot, ibozhir, cruel, and incredibly short-tempered. In the apartment, besides Anufriev, lived his mother, wife, and daughter, and the man often took out his drunken rage on them. He did this with anything that came to hand. His fists, a rolling pin, a belt. He dragged them by the hair and kicked them out of the house. The neighbors next door often heard the desperate screams of the girl and the hysterical crying of the women, but no one wanted to get involved with the big, angry man. Besides, Alexander not only beat his wife and daughter during drunken fights, he also smashed furniture, threw jars of pickles out of the fridge, and broke dishes. Angela quickly learned that it's better not to argue with her drunk husband at all, but at the same time, she realized that even staying silent could become a reason for a fight. Why are you quiet? Are you upset? I'm bringing money home, but you're still not happy. Hurry up. Anufriev would get angry right away. There was always a reason. But after coming out of a drinking binge, Alexander would turn back into an almost exemplary family man. He would fix the faucet and put up shelves when needed, and help his mother and wife. But such bright periods happened less and less often over time, as the addiction took its toll. Sober, Anufriev was a decent father, but drunk. His daughter annoyed him as she ran around the house, always noisy and wanting something. It was expected that Angela would get scolded by drunk Anufriev. She was blamed for Valya crying, she was called a bad mother. When, hearing her mother's screams, the girl started crying even harder, he would shove Angela away from him. "Go, calm her down, she hasn't gotten it yet either." Angela wiped blood from her face and hands, groaning in pain as she rushed to her daughter. When Valia got older, she too started getting caught under her father's angry hand. When drunk, Anufriev might shove his daughter aside while moving between rooms. He would smack her on the back of the head if, in his opinion, she talked too much or too loudly. He would dump a bowl of soup on the floor and make her clean it up. While Valia crawled on her knees across the floor, he silently watched. Apparently, Anufriev liked feeling strong, being aware of his power in the house, sometimes even pushing things to the limit. In desperation, Angela would take her daughter and go to her mother's, but after a few days, she would come back anyway. At the time, the woman still loved and missed Alexander, sometimes even feeling sorry for him. After all, Anufriev wasn't always like that. He could be a good husband and father when he wasn't drinking. At that time, the woman still believed that Alexander could settle down, although, of course, it's better not to believe in such things and just leave. But on top of that, her mother-in-law would come and persuade her daughter-in-law to come back. She told Angela, "Don't air your dirty laundry in public or shame yourself and your husband. Every family has issues. You should resolve them quietly." In terms of character, Angela was weaker than her mother-in-law and didn't dare to argue with her. For the same reason, she didn't call the police when her husband acted up. She didn't want judgment, gossip, or shame. However, rumors spread anyway. Kovilkino is a small town with only 19,000 residents, and Nufriev, who started working part-time as a taxi driver in the 2000s, was recognized by many people. It is known that Alexander also raised his hand against his mother. She, loving her son, blamed everything on his alcoholism, which is partly true, but that doesn't make it any easier for anyone. For his mother, Sasha was a sick person who deserved pity and an attempt to be cured, not a beast who beats his wife and child. The woman took Alexander to Saransk more than once. He underwent treatment for alcoholism, and the effect lasted for 2 to 3 months, but then everything started again because of the bruises. Valia Anufrieva sometimes came to school in closed clothing. Some people laughed at the girl because of her alcoholic father, but mostly they felt sorry for her, especially since many fathers drink. Valia had a very gentle character. She was open and friendly, despite what was happening in her family. At the very first music lessons, it turned out that Valia Anufrieva had a pure, beautiful voice. The teachers advised Anzela to enroll her daughter in the church choir, which the woman did. Valia liked spiritual music, and she gladly began to sing in church. She found comfort in religion and would come to church when it became unbearable to stay at home. Angela also attended church and was devout, and Anufriev would also come with his wife to Sunday services when he was sober. Valia studied well. She was a responsible girl and always came prepared for her lessons. Subjects were easy for her, and Valia even managed to help her struggling friends. At the same time as her regular school, the girl attended a music school in the piano class, where she was also successful. Her mother was proud of her, and her father, when he was sober, even praised her, but when he was drunk, of course, he didn't care. However, Anufriev did not forbid the girl from studying, and that was enough for both Valia and her mother. By the time Valia finished regular school, she had long since stopped seeking her father's approval. A deep-seated hatred grew in the girl's heart toward the man who was turning her life and her mother's life into hell. Because of her father, Valia was afraid of winter, because winter, or more precisely, the cold, was part of the hell her father created. Valia. You can't escape, father. Not Anufriev, sometimes even after beating them. The drunken Anufriev could throw his wife and daughter out into the cold. Kind-hearted neighbors advised Angela to leave, to abandon her alcoholic and rowdy husband. But the girl didn't dare, and like many others, showed patience as a miracle. Maybe fear held her back. Where could she go with a child? How could she live alone? It was also just habit. In short, we all know this whole chain and the mechanics of codependent and abusive relationships. In any case, Valentina was counting the days until she finished school and could leave Kovilkino. She was preparing to enter a music school in Saransk, and then she wanted to become a professional singer. The girl felt a little guilty about leaving her mother alone, but the desire to finally break out of this stone cage and feel free at least once in her life was stronger. After passing her final exams, Valentina had no trouble getting into the vocal department of the music college. Responsible and meticulous, she was immediately liked by both the teachers and her classmates. While she was studying, she regularly attended church in Saransk, prayed, and her faith continued to help her find peace. In Saransk, Valia met a young man from Ukraine. Only his last name Snegiryov is known. The young people quickly found common ground. Snegiryov was cheerful and lively, always telling something funny and teasing the sociable and straightforward girl. Valentina fell deeply in love, and as it seemed to her, forever. Soon she and Snegiryov became inseparable. The young man would come to visit his beloved at the dormitory, bring her flowers, and invite her to cafes. The girl believed in a fairy tale and allowed herself to dream. When Snegiryov proposed, Valentina burst into tears and said yes without any hesitation. The young man announced that he had decided to settle in Russia for good, and she was only happy about it. Despite everything, Valentina didn't want to move far from her homeland. The couple got married quietly and without any pomp, away from her mother. Valentina introduced her husband to her father with some apprehension, and afterwards, instead of visiting her parents, she would invite her mother to visit her in Saransk. The couple was still living in a rented apartment, but they were already thinking about getting a permanent place, especially since Valentina became pregnant very soon. She had to put her studies on hold for now, took an academic leave, and focused on her future child. Their first child, a boy named Nikita, seemed to make Snegiryov happy. The man couldn't let go of his son, always holding him, studying him closely, looking for his own features in the baby's face. Life became harder, since her husband's earnings now had to support both her and the child, but Valentina reassured herself that they were together, and that was the most important thing. She would continue her studies and would definitely find a job as soon as she could put the child in kindergarten. The young woman didn't need luxury. She understood that the best thing for a child was a loving family. After a short time, Valentina realized that she was pregnant again. The second child, a girl, was born just a year and a half after the first, and by the time she arrived, discord had already begun in the Snegiryov family. Maybe the reason was money, but maybe it wasn't. Either way, Snegiryov grew cold toward his wife, became withdrawn and distant. Arguments started, and one day during a quarrel, the word divorce was mentioned. As soon as this happened, Snegiryov almost immediately started talking about his intention to return to his homeland. "What about me, and what about your two children?" asked Valentina. Snegiryov promised support, promised to come and visit, but at the same time he avoided eye contact so carefully that everything became clear. The man is not just leaving, he is running away, leaving his ex-wife with two children on her hands. In short, he's just going out for bread. Valentina understood what that meant, and it terrified her to the core. The youngest girl, Sofia, was not even a year old yet. The woman couldn't afford a nanny, nor could she send the children to any of the local kindergartens. There was no money, no registration, and the only option was to return home to her mother and father. She had to forget about studying in Saransk as well, but there was a college in Kovilkino where Valentina intended to transfer. However, it wasn't for a music specialty. She planned to get a much more practical degree in land and property relations. Valentina had no choice here either. Finally, making up her mind and realizing there was no point in waiting any longer, the woman packed her things and went back to her hometown. During the time his daughter was away, Alexander Anufriev hadn't changed a bit. He still drank heavily and beat women. His wife still smashed furniture and threw dishes on the floor, and his mother still put up with it all. Valentina would never have come back to this hell with children, but what choice did she have? Young, naive, foolish, she wasn't really thinking with her head, but with her infatuations. Of course, that never leads to anything good. That's probably where 80–90% of divorces come from. But it turned out the way it did. It's not such a rare situation. Her insides seemed to twist into a knot when the painfully familiar house appeared ahead, and the woman held her daughter, whom she was carrying in her arms, even tighter. Angela came out to meet them with fresh bruises. "Father's drunk," she half whispered. "Don't make any noise." Valentina and the children sneaked inside, and the familiar sticky fear immediately made itself known. The boy pressed himself against his mother's leg. The heavy smell of alcohol hung in the air, and loud snoring came from the bedroom. 10, the children instantly fell silent, sensing a threat. 11, the mother helped Valentina unpack. 12, looking at her grandchildren, the woman kept sighing. Her heart ached at the thought of what awaited them. 13. Valentina clutched the cross hanging on her chest and began to pray, asking God for protection for the children, but the prayers didn't help. 15. The very next day, Anufriev got drunk and beat his daughter and wife, and he scared the children almost half to death. Sofia had a hysterical fit, and she didn't sleep for half the night. 17. Nikita, sobbing, clung to his mother, not understanding what was happening. Valentina, wiping away her tears, tried to calm the children, promising them that everything would be fine. 19, but no one believed it. It seemed that Valentina had never escaped from this nightmare. Broken bottles and plates, jam flying onto their heads, slaps on the back of the head. Now, for the children's crying, Anufriev punished both women at once. He could hit them with something or slam them against the wall. His mother, by that time already a sick elderly woman, still hadn't given up hope of fixing her son. She took him to Saransk again, and once again he was coded. Sober, Anufriev would walk with his grandchildren on the street and even went to church with the family, where he prayed for deliverance from alcoholism. But again, after 2 or 3 months, the old habit returned. By then, Anufriev's mother had died, leaving no one to stop Angela from airing their dirty laundry. Valentina started filing complaints with the police one after another. They promised to look into it and sent a district officer to have a talk with Alexander Anufriev. Those talks didn't help at all. The man listened tensely, stayed silent, and sometimes pretended to listen. The district officer would leave, thinking he had done his duty, and Anufriev would go back to his old ways. And of course, the story would repeat itself. Even though there was a real nightmare happening at home, Valentina was a good student, responsible and non-confrontational, and she quickly became the group leader. Some teachers remembered her from school, and many felt sorry for her. Valentina quickly became close with the college psychologist, Lyudmila Sedisheva. The woman later described it like this: "As a psychologist, I was naturally aware of her family problems. Valya is a rather open and sociable person. More than once she came to me and told me what was going on at home. Valya often complained to me about her father. He hits her, causes scandals, hits her. Her mother had children, and the girl's father was simply a sadist, and they had no one to turn to for help. Once I came to their place, and everything from the fridge was scattered all over the floor. Cabbage soup spilled, pasta, broken jars. Angela and Valya were crawling on the floor, picking everything up in silence, afraid to say a word, while he, the brute, stood over them." One of the neighbors later recalled, admitting that she herself was afraid of Anufriev. The man's cruelty became truly boundless after his mother's death. Anufriev mercilessly beat his family members. Both Valentina and her mother ended up in the hospital with concussions at different times. He didn't spare his little grandchildren either. Valentina's children were terrified of their grandfather and would start screaming hysterically whenever he approached. The men felt like they were losing their minds. They begged Anufriev not to touch the children and tried to shield them with their own bodies, but this only excited the man even more. "I'll send him to the other world," shouted Valentina, after another one of her father's outbursts, bursting into tears. No one took the threat seriously, and it was clear that Valentina herself said it in a moment of anger. But later, one of the neighbors would remember hearing those words. For the first time, the desperate woman thought of revenge. That was when she first realized she would do anything, not for herself, but for her children. Valentina met 24-year-old Alexander Kuznetsov online in December 2010. The guy had a criminal record. He got probation for some minor offense, and he was also unemployed. But the woman didn't care. It's clear why Kuznetsov was aware of Snegiryova's family situation, maybe even more than he would have liked. Valentina constantly told her acquaintance about how hard her life was and how aggressive and cruel her father had become lately. Alexander knew Anufriev personally, having given him several taxi rides. He felt for Valentina but believed he couldn't help. Snegiryova herself didn't think so. Once, during a real-life meeting, the girl fell silent while talking about her father, as if gathering her courage. When she spoke again, her voice sounded surprisingly calm. "Tell me, Sasha, can you arrange for someone's death? We need to get rid of my father." Kuznetsov stared at her in disbelief, but Valentina looked at him seriously and resolutely. The man realized she wasn't joking, and he felt uneasy. At least, that's what he would later tell the court. He said it was nonsense and tried to talk Valentina out of it, but she insisted. Anufriev constantly beats the children, never lets anyone have peace, making life with him unbearable. In January 2011, he went on an especially long drinking binge, and he wasn't planning to stop anytime soon. And on February 14, the woman Nam had to call the police twice to calm down the violent head of the family. "He was beating Mom so badly I thought he'd kill her. Help me, Sash." The woman pleaded persistently. 75 and Kuznetsov agreed. 76. "I'll find a partner. How much will you pay?" 77. After a brief negotiation, the price for Alexander Anufriev's life was set at 15,000 rubles, 78. That's exactly how much Kuznetsov and his partner, 32-year-old Alexander Zvonaryov, were supposed to get for eliminating Father Valentin. It's Alexanders everywhere. Zvonaryov, unlike his younger companion, had actually served time for a real crime, sexual assault, and he also didn't have a steady job. And he often needed money too. He assured Valentin he knew what to do and that everything would be done cleanly. "I'll pay 5,000 in advance, and you'll get the rest after the job is done," the woman warned. The men exchanged glances. The money wasn't much, but both Kuznetsov and Zvonaryov had already imagined holding it in their hands. They agreed. However, after Valentina left, Zvonaryov turned to his companion and grunted. "Let's trick her, take the advance, spend it on drinks. What can she do to us? She definitely won't go to the police." Kuznetsov shook his head. Valentina's face, with its hunted and desperate look, was right before his eyes. The woman needed help. "Anufriev is a cruel monster. The world will only be better without him." On Friday, February 18th, 2011, Valentina Snegiryova met with the future killers to hand over the money. Ironically, she had taken it from her father. And before going to the meeting, she went to church and took communion. The woman said that on Saturday, Anufriev would be home alone all day. It was the perfect time for a visit. On the 14th, after that very loud scandal with the police, Anufriev kicked the women out of the house, Snegiryova. Her children and mother had been at Angela's mother's house for several days. This meant that there was no need to come up with an excuse to get unnecessary witnesses out of the house. It was a good opportunity. Kuznetsov and Zvonaryov took the money and promised that they would visit Valentina's father tomorrow. Both already knew they would carry out the job. On Saturday, February 19th, the men knocked on Anufriev's apartment door. Anufriev was slightly surprised to see Kuznetsov at the door, but when the guests suggested having a drink together, he immediately stepped aside and invited them in. The men didn't stand on ceremony. They followed the host to the kitchen. When Anufriev turned away, One of the men hit him on the head with a hammer, then again and again. Anufriev staggered, groaned, and collapsed, but the attacker continued. The blows kept coming, crushing into his skull. A total of 5 hammer wounds would be found on Anufriev's head. When the victim fell, the second perpetrator grabbed a knife and mostly stabbed in the heart area, driving the blade between the ribs. Anufriev would end up with 10 stab wounds on his body. After making sure the man was dead, the accomplices sprinkled tobacco on the floor. Zvonariev hoped this would throw off the police dogs. After that, the criminals slipped out of the apartment and closed the door behind them. They threw the knife and hammer into a snowdrift not far from the house. The job was done. That same day, they met with Snegiryova and received the rest of the money. When she learned about her father's death, Valentina didn't feel the slightest bit of regret. On the contrary, she felt relieved. The woman understood that she had taken a heavy sin upon her soul, and that if anyone found out, she wouldn't sit in the defendant's chair together with those she had hired. But she was ready for this the moment she gave Zvonariev and Kuznetsov an advance for her father's death. Anufriev's body remained in the apartment for a day, and Angela found it the next evening. One account says she was unaware of what had occurred. When she saw her husband's body lying on the floor with his skull smashed through and his clothes covered in blood, she was paralyzed at first, then rushed to call the police. According to another version, Valentina told her mother about what had happened as early as February 19th. Angela didn't judge her daughter. Instead, she gave her the remaining 10,000 rubles, which Valentina later handed over to the perpetrators. On the 20th, they entered the apartment where Anufriev was lying together with 121. The arriving officers immediately assumed domestic homicide as the version 122. They knew Anufriev was an alcoholic. Maybe he drank with someone and argued. That's how it usually happens. But on the floor, investigators noticed something unusual. Snuff tobacco. Someone was covering their tracks. They questioned the neighbors, Angela, and then Valentina. 128. Neither Angela nor her daughter tried to cover for their late father. 129. They discussed the beatings, the scared women and children, and neighbors confirmed it. 121. And revenge really could have been the motive for the murder. But neither Valentina nor her mother, and logically they became the main suspects, looked capable of such a crime. The 122 blows were clearly delivered by a strong male hand, so this version needed to be thoroughly investigated. Already during the first interrogation, one of the investigators noticed Valentina's strange behavior. The girl wasn't crying, didn't look upset, and considering the story she told, this was quite understandable. 126, but Snegiryova was very nervous. The investigators assumed that she knew who committed the crime. 128. During the interrogation, one of them warned that the woman could be eliminated as a witness. 129, and the frightened Valentina told everything. 120. On Sunday night, a police car drove up to the house where Alexander Kuznetsov lived, and almost at the same time, a similar car stopped at the house where Alexander Zvonarev lived. 122. Both criminals were at home. 123. They didn't go on the run, thinking they had covered their tracks and that it was now impossible to track them down. 124. Almost all the money they got for the job had already been spent on drinks and snacks. 125. Kuznetsov confessed to the crime rather quickly. 126. During the investigation, he demonstrated how he handled Anufriev and pointed out where he disposed of the crime weapon. The knife was found soon after, but the hammer could not be found. 128. According to Kuznetsov, he acted alone, and Zvonariev was simply present nearby in case the victim tried to escape. 129. But later he changed his testimony and told the truth. 120. And when asked about his motive, he replied, "I felt sorry for the girl, that's the only reason I went." But Zvonariev was not going to confess to a serious crime. 122. He already had one on his record, and he didn't want to go back to prison. 123. The man stubbornly insisted that he didn't help Kuznetsov, and that he had nothing to do with the crime at all. 124. As expected, no one believed him. 125. As for 21-year-old Valentina Snegiryova herself, after confessing she remained calm, even detached. She told the investigator she had no regrets. Yes, let me go to prison, but at least my children will sleep peacefully in their own home and know that no one will raise a hand against them, no one will throw them out. Later, Valentina will still say that she regrets what happened and wants to bring everything back to how it was. At that moment, she had only one thought: she and her children were free from the tyrant. Many of Valentina's acquaintances did not believe that she paid Kuznetsov and Zvonarev specifically for her father's death. An open and bright Valya could not have made such a terrible decision, they said. She probably just wanted to scare him, claimed the teachers at the school where she studied. Someone recalled hearing Valentina, after her arrest, say to her mother, "I just wanted my father to feel what it's like to be beaten and humiliated." Snegiryova herself said, "They told me that I could either injure him or finish the job," meaning to take his life. I chose to finish the job. 125. Even after her confession, many of Snegiryova's acquaintances, and even people who just heard about the case, openly took the woman's side. Valentina was protecting the lives and health of her own children. Sooner or later, Anufriev would have crippled them, or even worse. It was only a matter of time. They say the woman simply had no other choice left. Although, in my opinion, an adult is not obligated to live in their parents' apartment, and their parents' apartment does not belong to an adult. And most likely, it turns out that this adult, being grown up, could have found a way to separate from the tyrant father and not live with him in the same apartment. He chose for himself the solution to stay in his parents' apartment and, so that no one would interfere with living there normally, to deprive his own father of life. At the same time, there are clearly other options, including, for example, renting a room in a communal apartment, a room in a dormitory, or simply renting an apartment very cheaply. In these apartments, especially in small towns with under 20,000 people. Nevertheless, indeed, neither the police nor anyone else helped her, even though there was clearly violence, and apparently many people knew about it. One way or another, Valentina Snegiryova is, in my opinion, a complex and tragic example of a person driven to the extreme by systematic domestic violence. Her case is number 124. This might not be a criminal's cold-blooded calculation, but a desperate act of self-preservation and protection of her children, whose broken will ultimately led to a criminal decision. She suffered her alcoholic father's cruelty since childhood. This caused deep trauma in her, along with suppressed aggression, hopelessness, and a gentle, non-confrontational nature. Excelling in studies, creativity, music, and the church choir was her way to compensate for the horror at home and create a sense of normalcy. Constant violence, humiliation, and fear for herself, her mother, and later for her own children became the trigger that broke down her moral barriers. The key motive behind her actions was not revenge, but despair. She tried every legal protection, contacting police, leaving, and seeking help from relatives. The system failed to protect her, so she took the problem into her own hands, and the solution she found was far from optimal. She couldn't manage to live on her own. Yes, maybe in worse living conditions, but from a moral standpoint, those conditions definitely wouldn't have been the worst. In short, this reveals a certain weakness of character and a glass ceiling when it's easier for a person to take someone's life than to learn to live independently, separately, and like an adult. Her decision to hire hitmen is also an act of shifting responsibility. She couldn't take a life herself, but she was ready to arrange it in order to finally break the vicious cycle of violence. Valentina demonstrates signs of dissociation. Her calmness during the interrogation, the absence of tears, this is not a lack of emotion, but a deep psychological defense. She had long since buried her father as a person in her mind, and his physical death was merely a formal end to the nightmare for her. Her subsequent remorse is more of a socially expected reaction than a genuine feeling, since at the moment of the crime she was convinced she was right. Interestingly, even after her arrest, her image as a victim driven to the edge evoked widespread sympathy both from acquaintances and the public. 120. This reflects a collective understanding that sometimes the law, or more precisely, very often the law in Russia, is powerless against domestic tyranny, and often because of this, victims take justice into their own hands. Although in this case, obviously there were other options. Nevertheless, Valentina Snegiryova is by no means a classic criminal, but rather a product of the system, family, society, and law enforcement agencies. Her story is a cry for help that was never heard in time and led to tragedy. Tragedies played out by all the rules of the crime genre, but with a deeply human existential undertone. The verdict in the case was delivered in mid-August 2011. By that time, Alexander Zvonaryov had also confessed to everything. He was tormented by nightmares, and he understood that denying it any longer was useless. The results of the examination confirmed that he was present at the scene of the crime. According to the court's decision, Valentina Snegiryova received 5 years of imprisonment, with a postponement of the sentence until her youngest child turns 14. Alexander Kuznetsov and Alexander Zvonaryov received 13 and 13.5 years, respectively. Strict Regime 137 as of 2020 Valentina Snegiryova. By that time, she had gotten married and changed her last name to Kalashnikova, was free, and was already raising 5 children. Her further fate is unknown. 139. And what do you think about this case? Leave your comments, like or dislike, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss notifications about new, equally interesting videos. I'll share sources and extra materials about the case on the Telegram channel.